Uno, dos, tres. All right, guys. We are starting. So please take your seats, take the chairs at the bottom. Our external visitors, thanks. I would call to the stage Edouard Cabey, who is going to tonight our guest for tonight. So let's welcome Edouard. Thank you.
So Dietz, I'll be short in describing who you are, because I think we all really want to listen to you. I didn't feel like looking at your bio, because I think I know who you are. Maybe you can contradict me. For all of you, he was trained in Zurich, and he had the occasion to also go by a Cooper Union in New York, and he has a long working experience in Switzerland, where he now lives and works in Zurich, where he has his own professional project. And then, in parallel to his architectural practice, he teaches at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, a laboratory that is called ALICE, Atelier pour la Conception de l'Espace, which for me is very special, because I had the occasion to teach for 3 years. As a matter of fact, probably the students that got to be in a class with me will recognize a lot of influence in the way, at least, that I developed my teaching strategy, which are so many things that I have to say I learned through you. I think it's a great chance to have you here. I was thinking before about the fact that you're coming from Switzerland, which is on one hand a 1 hour plane ride away, so it's a context that is very near to us. At the same time, it's a context that's different from Barcelona. I think there's another attitude towards design, towards architecture, and I think that we have a lot to learn from your lecture, especially the way that you deal with materials, the way that you deal with structure, the way that you deal essentially with space. But actually, rather than marking differences, I think that the great chance there is that I think practice and ALICE and the way that we work at IAAC, I think that even if we work with maybe sometimes with different media, I think we work with a very, very similar attitude, in the sense that all of what I've learned from you is that if we can design through making, we can by constructing, and even if with the first years in Switzerland, you work by hand drawing, you work with hand tools. I think that fairly that we're actually using here. I think that essentially we are working there because the attitude that we have searching immediately and getting the hands dirty, working with materials and trying to propose new ideas by the sake of probably something that is similar. So I think it's for all of us, students and staff, to front it today to probably a very, very exciting presentation by you. So I'd like to ask all of you to help me into welcoming Dietz on this.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ed. It's a big pleasure to be here. And Ed almost already said everything I will say tonight. So I will talk a lot about making, and I will also talk a lot about collaboration. And sitting in this space, I must say, I've been here 3 years ago and very briefly also last year. And I must say, just in seeing this place already, I feel very much at home. There is 1 hour difference in time, or let's say in travel. But at the same time, I think there's really a lot of things that do connect us. And actually, I do believe in general that basically there is always a bonding type of activity and reaches between any cultures. So I will talk a lot about this, in fact, tonight. Now, I realized that that no one of you guys asked me what the title of the lecture was, and I just saw on the poster, which I hadn't seen before, that it's about works, right? And in fact, as no one asked me what the lecture would be named, I took the liberty just to give it a name, which you can see here. It's called the Red River. I won't explain why. And after talking to Ed also about the lecture, I decided to not of my projects. Of my I'll strictly talk about Alice and about teaching tonight. So I'm not showing this, and this is also not the gate. There's no Red River in this building, so this is one of my buildings. That's the only image you will see later. So I will talk about thresholds, because I truly believe that immersion is us think what makes us. And in that, I think there is a very interesting presence. It's actually Jean-Jacques Rousseau who has been writing education, and I do like this frontispiece you see here on the left very much. On the very left, you see a small person actually starting to learn, and you see that this person is a young child being literally thrown into head down. In fact, to learn to swim, I think we have to get our hands dirty, and I think we have to actually be in the framework where there's no to do that. So in that sense, I really believe immersion is in fact pedagogy, but a lifelong learning. So that's why I personally believe that it has to do with design, has to have to do with immersion. And I would even say that immersion is the critical mass of design. And this critical mass of design, I think, is really at stake quite in today's practice, because it's forgotten in the sense what it means actually to produce things, and to produce those things together and not alone. I will continue with another image which now already starts to relate to Alice. So our lab is it's about 10 years old, and for us actually exactly that moment of totally opening up and actually introducing yourself in any type of new work, in actually going through that threshold, or in actually falling into that rabbit hole where you don't know everything as it was before, I think is a crucial moment in learning. So we've been, I don't know, yeah, it actually does show. I'm glad that the beamer now works. What really counts, I think, is that when we start to, and I'm first a project that is strictly first year, so you have to other end. I mean, you all have been, if you're once been in first year, now you're in advanced architecture. So we, but I think especially at that moment when you for the first time get immersed thinking and making of architecture, moment, of course, for any young person in his or her life, as you're very much confronted with your own person. These are portraits shot by Berenou, he's the photographer we work with quite often, and Dylan Berenou, at the end of a first semester, shot a few portraits of students. And I put these portraits here because not only do I find them extremely beautiful, but I really adore them because they speak about the personality of the students, but also about the seeking of personality. So I believe personally, and again, this is lifelong, I personally believe that through this kind of work that we are doing all, and through immersing ourselves into that work, we are actually lifelong confronting ourselves with the question who we actually are. Time, another photo by Dylan, what architecture is. Plaster casts, some students did in our first year's course. I cannot say whether this is architecture or not, but I believe it is. But besides that, I would very much like to talk tonight about, some of you may know this image. This is an image that to show in the very beginning of his book Together, where he talks about shops that have been introduced at the end of the 19th century in order to work to people in big US cities. And he uses that kind of workshop, and I think we're just now sitting in a wonderful workshop. That model of a workshop actually as a cultural frame which is able to encompass not only culture but also to advance it beyond any kind of formal doing together or formalities that would separate or segregate into classes or different kinds of skills, but that act those differences through the making itself. And I think, again, this is a very crucial notion. And I would like to add in Switzerland, the education of an architect is open to anyone who has a... So if you have your high school degree, you can go to ETH Zurich, to EPFL without any exam. Therefore, of course, people who come from very diverse backgrounds, what they degree of a high school, and already these are very different. And therefore, of course, when we start to work with these people, we are confronted with a condition where different backgrounds, but also very different skills. So one of the tasks is actually to bring these people together to foster skills and to, through these skills, advance what they learn. So to come together and make things together, and if you just zoom into this image on many details, I think it's quite amazing just to see how this activity unites, but at the same time actually stresses. So it's not about collaboration where you just share a task and no one really has responsibility, but it's sharing, but it's also to be utmost, not work. And I think you know that very much as you are working here. So this was a reference to Richard Sennett, and in this, of course, tools play a major, key role. I'm showing here that this, some of you, this is one of Richard Sennett called The Craftsman. You can read it on the pencils you see right there. And I show these tools, that any tool there to augment our capacities. And Richard Sennett actually goes as far, and he shows, you certainly know this famous painting, The Ambassadors, by Holbein, who actually, no, not Holbein, sorry, Holbein, where you see the two ambassadors with this anamorphic skull, But what is even more interesting is that in the background there are, and also on the table, there are an amazing array of tools of the time, sextants, astronomical tools, you name it. And Richard Sennett actually claims that tools are often invented for what you can actually do, actually can do. And I think it's very much true for all the times, and of course, as much today as ever. So what you can do with the pencil is endless and limitless, literally, and that the same goes for robots or for scripting or you name it. So I think tools are really crucial. And as we are in first year, we actually, when we did it the very first time, we did introduce digital tools very fast in the very first year. Rhino after 6 weeks, I think. 2D after 2 weeks, or 3D 3 weeks. But in fact, we found out that this was too fast, and precisely because the background of the too diverse, and just by giving them those tools, they did not actually understand what it meant in space and to understand space. So we basically came back a very long way and went purely physical by now. So we're purely analog nearly until the when we again coordination work. So tools, fundamental, any type of tools, because I think what they actually make our mind with a physical reality tool does. So I think, for instance, robots are so important because they actually do translate what you first think, then program into a physical reality, which you finally will touch again and even labor again. It just showed me you've got also that are hand tools. So you combine actually highest technology with very forward technology, and I believe personally this is where we have to go. So just a few tools. Again, these are tools that have been found by Dylan Berenou in our ateliers. This is literally a straw he did through those spaces. So some people actually start to bring their own tools. So this is not something we sell, you see here, but actually something a student brought with him or her and introduced it into the work. Finally, of course, to work in such a way with tools that you start to understand how you can produce realities through those tools that always have a very immediate, tangible reality. Again, very importantly, something that becomes immediately speaking of me. It actually takes on its own character, its own reality, its own personality, I would even say. And this is actually the kind of environment we produce by working in the shop. So the shop, very literally, as here, by the way, our 200 plus students. So we have a first year class that are 200 plus. So it's bigger than this school. Work literally in an atelier, so in a workshop where they're constantly confronted with what they produce. So this kind of dialogue between the work that you do and self that speaks to you is fundamental, I think, in the production of architecture and collaboration. So I come to tools which start to communicate, that start to look at what you're producing, start to communicate it into other formats, into other frames, into other, again, realities, and how these tools actually help us to also bring things together quite literally. So we see here students literally working together, setting up a specific moment of a model using very basic tools that start to talk about gravity, about horizontality, about verticality, about in space. So again, the confrontation between what is a physical reality that we confront with our bodies and one which we just think, or one which just fundamental moment. So this, in being confronted with all those is kind of a fundamental working environment that we try to bring into an extremely immediate level for everyone. Immersion, I'm not only talking about students and freshmen, I'm talking, of course, also about ourselves. So we are totally in this process, and as we are doing every year something totally new, we also never know what really will come out, and quite often we are the students, especially since we are getting a bit bigger with the projects that we're trying to build with our students. I think this kind of thinking about possibly be is very, and finally start to think about what we architects is so fundamental in the sense that I believe we really truly have to rethink the role that we take ourselves. I believe we have to enact ourselves, empowers the person. I think we empower ourselves because all of the market that is out there being constructed. So I think we have to imagine new realities. We have to take initiative, thinking how we could create spaces that we will finally share with others. And the project I'm showing is Luna. It's an ephemeral stage for a festival in the regionally. Together with this kind of initiator, we've been able to create a unique moment that only is there for 2 weeks a year, but that actually I would say different aura wearing in a town or the lakeside of the Lake of Geneva. So tonight, that was a short introduction. Tonight, I would like to show the project developed with students and researchers. I have a bit too many slides, so I may only show 2 or maybe even 1 if I'm too slow, but let's see how it goes. Basically thematize what I started to quickly talk about in this short introduction. I will talk about collaboration. I will talk about space, and I will also talk about in the sense of how we structure processes, because I think if you work together is how you structure processes. So first moment, immersion into collaboration. I will show House 1 with a collaboration with the industry. So I mentioned a few firms here. I won't name them here, they're locals. But what counts much more is this. This is the collaborators in this project. That's 227 students plus staff. I truly can say that each one of these people has contributed to the project I will show. It actually started as a hypothesis. You will find that in there as well. It started as a hypothesis because collaborative project together, but we were never sure we could do at that many people. We took 20 people, 25 maybe. And then all of a sudden, and actually was in the theater, Lausanne theater, Vidi, we said, why don't we fund this? Why don't we do wearing wigs? In fact, amazing wig, because it was really funny. So maybe we can do one project with 200, and it was a hypothesis whether or not that would be possible. And actually, we did. We built a structure that is by 11 meters and weight and we injure people, literally. So the elaboration, I will show you elements that actually led to this moment. The main achievement is not architecture, which you know, we could do a test identity. I don't want that. I really want to conclusion with so many is an achievement. The hypothesis, happy that it actually worked. I will talk about how we basically would just start to think about any type of mode that usually is being used for projects in collaboration, like competitions or the like. This project would look very different. So we were not so much interested in no competition where we do phases, but rather we said what matters is that any discussion is always based. So basically you're allowed to bring is propositions. And of course, we'll ask questions, but it's never an answer to say, this won't work. So you always have to find it will work or you actually need to work. To do so, we introduced a very simple idea. We said that if we use a very simple structural system, the structural system will start to work as a genetic code, and the structural system will also start to negotiate possibilities and negotiate solutions for possible ideas. And the model we took is not this one here. I think for what we call protostructures. So a nice is not yet full, has one domino, has this quality, but have other systems. So here we're showing a project by Ken Isiak from 74, which uses actually standard systems here, a scaffolding system, which actually literally works to erect things and to into gravitational space. And to use such a system was of more interest for us because it's much less hierarchical, and we would even go one day, we take, which already at its time revolutionized, in fact, carpentry. So the balloon frame actually reinvented a structural system that was based in European culture and transformed into a condition where the land was not known yet and skills were maybe not as developed yet. A system that can build almost any structure and any program that is redundant, so you can cut into it almost at any place. You just have to create additional members. A system which is basically extremely resilient to any ideas, and at the same time has a very intrinsic how you build up stuff. Have to follow ideas. You can always twist it. It works that we just our bodily, and it is also capable to react to idea open, literally use it to actually build up systems that are a certain mistakes. And I think this is quite an addition. So in order to do so, you need to base your ideas on very what the balloon frame does, basically connect that has almost physically, it's about the logic of through bracing, it becomes a resilient base. I think it's also important in this condition we actually produce the We designed it ourselves. We proposed it as a point of departure in this 200 people project in order to give a first blank page, which then would be, of course, a frame as an A4, of course, is a frame itself to what you draw, but at the same time is also open to whatever you may draw into space, into that system. It's also important to mention that the structure itself, it only holds up itself, so that to actually make this structure perform. So structurally, this wouldn't hold up yet. It just holds up itself. It's super fragile. And through its fragility, of course, it asks for interaction between projects, literally weaving projects into the structure that will make it stable, will make it finally something that is able to contain space and program. So this is what we developed, basically an idea, again, very generic, spatial cross space with development and a system which correlates very strongly to a timeline. Whatever you see now is also structured very much into a timeline. I will show this a bit later. But I think in terms of collaboration, again, I'm totally convinced that if you want to do wild projects, you have to be very structured, because otherwise you won't get them done. And I guess you know that very well, because the computer will also not obey your thoughts if you don't structure your project. This is a bit a kind of a script for 15 weeks of semesters, 100. We work with the first one we call, and rooms literally, they started to invest into the framework and the structural framework of this proto-structure I showed you. So here you just few examples of individual projects. They quite literally start base to advantage of the structural principle, constraints, liberal. So with this, we produced about 100 room projects that have been investing this space. Here, just a few examples. We have, of course, extremely abundant material. A montage where we superimposed many project ghosts-like figure where all these diverse projects before they actually have the chance. So students producing 100, a huge of actual into one structure and into one in the model actually transgress their own reality with the other projects. Projects were built in, so you see in the studio, so these rules in order to already grasp the necessities. And let's again not forget, these are all for at this point 16 weeks of architecture, 17th week architecture. By directly the issues in scale I think they quite direct way. So how you deal with is very important in this, but also to communicate with one another. Because what we finally did is then we had a discussion, and of course with some preferences for certain projects were built up. Not only one project was proposed by the students, but actually combined into literally hybrids of several projects already in each studio. So what we did is a strategic plan of the potential projects that we started to bring together in this kind of condition. You see still very abstract, but also importantly superimposed. Each of the students group would get a kind of limited space where they would be free to do whatever they want. We're already, this superimposition would lead to negotiation both in spatial, how far does your project go and how far does mine go, but also of course structurally, because as we are, here you see them as an exploded axonometry. Projects are superimposed low because the product holds them up in space. This kind of superimposition was an important tool to actually bring people to negotiate and one another together and to design literally together inside of that structure. And again, this is, I would say, probably the most direct and the most specific difference between a kind of competition procedure, which through phases you would just exclude things and just take in the end what you think is the best. So the superimposition actually demands constant negotiation and constant development of project. In order to do so, we produced this 1 to 5 work in 1 to 5 scale. So this is already quite big. 1 to 5 in 11 meters. Full size is already taller than we are. It's 2 meter 20 is a model, and you can start to build details that very literally function as they would function in real space. So you can start to do hinges and so on and so forth. So it's not a representative model at all. It's really a simulation of the future reality. Already the montage and demontage sequence, assembly, disassembly sequences were thought out because all the pieces were prefabricated in the ateliers, which basically were just furnished with hand saws, hand drawing, and a few computers now, which did the 3D work to coordinate the projects between one another. These projects then were brought into this 1 to 5 to then, together with the other students, negotiate exactly those superimpositions, as you can see some in this model, in 1 to 5 scale. So again, 1 to 5 scale, already fairly big. And very importantly, we had a timber engineer which worked with us, who is external from our lab, who actually calculated all the projects, because of course that responsibility we could have never taken. And he actually had a very important role at exactly in those moments where negotiations were so important, also in terms of structure. Of course, Remy had a very important role in those discussions, and we see just those discussions right here as they happened in the studio transversal, in the transversal studio between the students. Again, it's very important. What we tried to do there, and it actually works extremely well, is that it was not a top-down framework. So it was not the studio directors going to the other studio directors and say, so we have to resolve it like this. It was actually built up inside each studio as a task that you had those coordination and communication skills between one another. And I think this is very important because its first year it's, I would say, in similar type of kind of occupations. So each one, of course, did a bit of production, each one did a bit of coordination, each person did a negotiation. But as you all know, as soon as we go out, we will have to talk to contractors, we will have to talk to technical guys, engineers, we will have to coordinate with events, with the police, whatever it may be. And these kind of skills are as important as the design skills. So they are fully actually embedded in creative design skills, and we have to actually learn them in parallel in order to become efficient and daring designers, because otherwise we won't get our stuff done. So these moments actually crucial in the studio. The basis for then what will be documents very literally to be produced in order to be able to not only produce first the protostructure. So we see here a student group erecting next to the learning center. So we are here this year still in a kind of in vitro condition. We are on the campus, we're in full scale, but we are not really in the city. And this year we're going to Zurich, in fact, and we'll be in the middle of the city, fully exposed. So we're trying to take another step after this one this year. So here in, but yet not only in vitro, because actually it is full scale, it is fully inhabitable, and it will be fully constructed by those 200 students. So you see here, you will see a part of the students still working in hand drawings with listings, tables, and so on. Others starting to script, even cranking out the tables automatically. A lot of diversity. I think what is also very important for me, I really don't want that we have 12 identical studios, and I really insist that those studios have to be in their approach, and that's what you can see in those documents right here. So we had from people working with parametric tools at the end of this semester to those who computer, which I find is perfectly fine. Diagrams of how to mount elements inside the structure, and of course also full-scale testing. What is really nice, we are quite spoiled as well. It's not as nice as here, I would say, because the buildings are much more sterile. But we do have space as well. We can do full-scale testing, and as you can see, it's being done. And I think what is quite amazing is that it actually does show that with craft and just simple Japanese saws, you can do quite a lot of work and quite sophisticated details, as you can see here. Only very few power tools, some drills, and hand drills, so almost everything done by hand. And I think to start, this is really super nice, because I think once you start to understand how material works, you will have a better sense for any type of tool. But it's just an extension of our body in many senses. So to actually be close to that kind of material reality, I think is fundamental for understanding how we can actually deal with space, and how we can actually immerse ourselves into a production mode, into a production environment. So very literally making as a physical act, as something that happens between many, that has to be coordinated, that has to be thought in advance. So every single moment that actually counts in doing architecture is very literally experienced here. Being up there, being in height, being in a both abstract condition, as here we're still very much confronted with the protostructure as such, and at the same time in a very physical condition, where you start to feel your own weight in space against gravity, and as you are trying to actually place space into space. Few images. And again, Remy, the engineer, was of course controlling the details. At some moment there was quite an exciting moment. I wasn't there, but students started to get rid of all the bracing without having the projects in there, and all of a sudden this whole thing would start to. So that was quite a scary moment. So they had to put some bracing back up before they brought in the project, and then actually we were able to take it out. And of course, it does demand mutual respect and trust, because if someone lets drop a tool up there, not too good. And I'm very happy that we had no accident, and I knock on wood that it will be the same again this year, because of course that's the biggest fear, the venture. Here the protostructure nearly finished, and here in additional modes where projects are already being, and house one at its in the final critique. We created, or not we, actually this series of performances. So in this, instead of having a critique in front of student work, in front of models and drawings, we actually did it in the construct itself, and we initiated this whole series of discussions by a series of students themselves, which actually literally started to the project, which you can see here in action. We finished then with a symposium in the evening. I know this was the one in the morning. In the house itself, in the theater space, there were also performances, several places that were public, such as this theater space. And what is actually quite nice is this of inhabiting so many positions, is general construct almost anywhere. And just touching on it, but I brought a book with me, only very few, but we documented this process extremely meticulously. And what was very important for us is that we see this both as a super real project, hyper real project, but also as a totally fictional project. So the book is partly a fiction and partly a full documentation. So it's basically the first theory catalog, which sets and talks about certain ideas, project, and a construction catalog, which is meticulously documenting the process. And finally, I would say my favorite part, the inhabitation catalog, which basically portrays 12 fictitious inhabitants of house one, which is nearly a mythological in the Greek sense. Also, and I think it's worth looking at the book. I'm not showing the book today. I would recommend to have a look into it. I don't know where it should be sold here in 5 years. So if you're interested, well, this is in the book. It's called The Pond of Self-Reflection. Actually, originally it was not that name, so that was the writer inventing the name. A stair actually going down to this. I was just in falling water now, and I don't know whether you took it as a reference. The stair exactly like that goes down and has a small platform to fish and actually to air into the main space. It's beautiful. And there's a notion of that one in here. So I like the character who inhabits but this is the case of Matilda, the time-traveling cat, the stair, the main stair. So all these basically mutually. Of course, for instance, this project was they called it the tendon. So again, the writer took some liberty. The tendon basically was there to connect all the projects amongst themselves. So you were able to actually walk through. Sure. Again, these photographs are by Dylan Perenou, who photographed the students a year earlier. So here is portraying house 1 basis. And in fact, the castle very diverse, those spaces. This was Nick's project. The inhabitant there is the mother gardener. Well, don't want to get too corny here, but right above the theater. And finally, I'll close this. At the very end, we did that finally sum up the whole project. The element captured in 3D and put into this collective work. The house had an existence of a few months on the campus. I said it was very much in vitro, but it continued. I won't talk about that much. I'll just show you one image. Some of you probably know. Ed, again, was part of that adventure. It traveled to Versailles as a cadavre exquis in time and space, and took on a new form and a new series of programs in one of the courtyards of the stables to the Versailles, and you can see it here of exactly those stables in Versailles. That would be another lecture that could be done on that one. But I will talk now about a second project, because the one I showed now was really, that was aimed, and also the one that we are doing now is really aimed at the first year as a first immersion into a learning and making environment, and as a first immersion into collaboration. Let's repeat that with the collaboration, because I truly believe this is where we have to go as architects. This is where we can regain power, where we can regain projects. And that's what we should do. I think it's super necessary on all levels and in all sense. It ultimately also does become political in that sense. I'm totally convinced. Only want to show projects based in the first year. I want to show a second project which just shows again the notion of the structure of a process itself. It will again be about tools, but this time I will mainly talk about time. Now, just as a summary, project I just showed, I show you here what the program looks like from very far that we are doing over nearly 1 year. So what you see here is this year's program for House 2. This time we are going to Zurich, so the students know from the very beginning we will be at the Zurich Art University, ZHDK, in a very urban, for Zurich at least, urban environment below a train bridge, near to, I would say, the biggest single building campus in Europe. It's a campus in one building housing 5,000 students. And it's actually a former factory where they treated milk products. And what you see here is 28 weeks of semester, and in the end, those narrow lines are summer workshops where again the project will travel. But these timelines are fundamental because it's exactly here where we try to structure every moment in order to be able to work with so many people in a productive way. Because you can imagine such a project can break down if either students are not motivated, or there's chaos, or they cannot work because there's material missing, or they have a fight for whatever reason, the project will will literally break down, and that would be a pity with 200 people. So it's very important that we create this kind of framework where everyone knows what's going on, but through knowing what's going on really can take any kind of liberty in the project itself, as long as you can build it up in space. That's basically the main limit, I would say. So the second project will be a project that is still under construction, but that is a project that is not ephemeral, that is the of EPFL. It's fairly large square, you will see later, and here do it just with a single class or with campus-wide competition, but actually what we did was we worked with a group of students from and through any year. So we had from first year to PhD students, and from architecture to physics to sociologists. We had a very, very diverse group working on this project. And very importantly, we also had the clients on the project as well, which is a good thing to do as well. So, and so again, I know it's boring, but very important. This is the timeline. We showed another research project to the president of the archives. And while showing this project, the president, well, it was a bit intentional. I basically guided the discussion there, said, you know, we don't know what to do with the square in front of where you will put your installation. And he had all these famous architects. So there is Sana, who did the learning center. Vis-a-vis, there is the Kengo Kuma building called Art Lab today, which was under construction at the time. And in the north side, there was the Perrault building for mechanical engineering. And he said, you know, I have asked Perrault and have asked Kuma, and the only thing they did was to show their building. So they didn't do a square. So can you not do something for us? And I was hesitating because it was July, and he wanted to have it constructed in November in the following year. But of course, the temptation was very big. So what you see here is a super tight timeline, and the project I'm actually showing you, the main outlines and the concepts were done within 5 weeks. With again, I will show you a lot of process and some images at the very end. That was the first image we looked at when we started to analyze the site, and it very literally shows occupation. So this data gathered via the Wi-Fi networks, and basically these are the spots where people are with their smartphones. And as you can see, the square, which you can see on the lower end of this image, was totally unoccupied. It's not just on this image. It was not. It was really like that constantly. And I just met someone recently visiting and saying, "Ah, I didn't know there was a square," because it wasn't a square. Now it is. So these are some images. You see there's the Kuma building under construction on the right. In the back you see the learning center and some devastated benches. So really, even though there is a tree and plants, not a very friendly environment. And at the same time embedded in an absolutely landscape on the campus anymore. Already, you probably, I don't know when you're with us, but if you just visit once, go to, I don't even know that the aim was that actually bring it back. check. So again, we work with a series of workshops. So I will again be quite tedious about this because I think it's crucial in order to understand. As I said, there is a series of super dense works. See here, sometimes they're spaced within 1 week. And again, what we did is we did not just say, okay, do a project and then we discuss which one is the best. What we try to do is to do something which is already content focused in order to, you cannot work with groups of 30 people at once. So you have to be specific and force the group in order to create specific topics that you can target precisely. So we basically brought into the workshop a series of topics. You see they're very basic. Context, ground, vegetation, water, furniture, activity, lighting, roofing, sound, art, linked to some surveys we did before. I didn't put this in here, but with the aim that any participant in the group, and including bring in ideas in giving them a form, as for instance, reference sheets, use often to actually coordinate again ideas and to give physical form. We see a few examples, and with these there were already first series of ideas that were very much aimed at activities and programs in link with those topics. So for instance, ground became specifically important as it started to create again something like a canvas for the overall project. Discussions, but always based on physical elements. So it was anything to be brought in, which is ideas, materials, the open kind of framework. The only thing we brought in were the topic plus this common model that we prepared to have a base for discussion. And then based on this invitation of the clients, there was also the chief architect of Kuma at some point. And then instead of going back with the same, what we always do, we basically filter for the next workshop the material that we gathered. So we don't start at the same point again. So my team, so researchers and architects, normally it's fairly lean team, around 3 people, captured the main ideas and brought them already into a form in order to feed them back into the next workshop, into drawing. So the next workshop was extremely drawing based in order to be capable to give more of a tangible dimension to those ideas that were just nearly in brainstorming fashion the weekend before. So 1 weekend later, this happened. And what is important here is, again, the was very open, very immediate, very physical. So as it is so fast and so many people involved, a super immediate, nearly primitive mode of operation. Large. There were 3 by 5 meters roughly, and we were literally standing around drawings and then superimposing them. And this was a very important moment because we literally worked with the idea that there would be a common ground, what we call the super surface, where we would start to place ideas and programs according to activities and also according to how they could be articulated with this idea of super surface as a physical condition. And physical, in this sense, already the superimposition as a first is the superimposition of the drawings, of the layers of drawings on top. These basically 10 topics from workshop number 1 led to 8, some as nearly basis, so the super surface was the basis for the overall project, and then we had some luxury elements like le miroir d'eau, which we were not able to pay for, but nearly everything else was done. But already the ideas in that sense became clearly, and they had already sketches and drawings that were quite clear regarding what they could. And we created a series of elements, basis for these interventions that we would then translate. You can see here on a setup of literally a series of programs set into the context super to the a few term. I will show the project in a minute. The key moment was because this project used to choose. So he chose, for instance, the Sana building against the jury. This man here who made it happen. And nervous because we did, so we just had an expensive option and a cheap option, but based on the same concept. And I was a bit nervous, as you can see here, but in fact worked out quite well. So he was happy, basically, as we had that really were so much based on the idea of community building, built on a very modest, it was possible tools, and actually quite a few will be already campus. Don't know. I will show now very quickly the project. First overview shows you the size of that square. That square has the size famous squares such as the Piazza San Marco, which you can see on the right. And one of the challenges was to space that is both bring the potential of the void and the landscape, and at the same time have an empty square, but very literally that you enable activities at any moment of the square actually would start to appropriate our hope. So I go through it very quickly. It's also a connection to other parts on the campus, so it expands literally. And it works with a very simple idea. So it's an idea about how we can relate the territory to the body, landscape to the body. And landscape to the body is very much scale to the body and what we see. So on the one hand, on what we touch, where we can sit, what we actually tangibly will experience as space, and at the same time, how I orient myself in a larger context, in this case, very clearly, the Lake of Geneva landscape. So these minimal differences in horizon are actually linked. Right? So you see there's a horizon above 33 centimeters below, so kind of a lounge height atmosphere, an inclined plane, which will capture as we move up. We tested specifically, I would say, in 3D. It's also important to mention, so the small circles you see here, these were the existing project of the square, or the existing physical concrete of the square that we literally into the scheme. And you can see that we tried to really understand how all these moments start to relate both to buildings and the overall landscape. And what you see here, the elements that started to create, which we called the realms that play on those horizons and start to engage. But it does, so this is not our project yet. So it's not as populated yet. But we had a few programs, and already now we can say that it works. So we had a first program, which is very little people there, called the Food Loop. Our Food Loop is a bit small. Food trucks, it's 6 right now. They're extremely used. It's a very simple strip and around, oriented the north of the square. I go through this very quickly. You will see a photo in a minute. The second element is what we saw within one of the rounds, garden with more smaller seating areas with the lower horizon. So in this super surface plane. The bosquet, a small that will be planted in the north side of the square. This is not yet there. In continuation of the disc, so the pillars of the disc that you see here, which are the gradins, which the space that is both activating the landscape and creating a cover in basically a shade in summer below with a kind of oscillating light, which you can see here in the section below. You will see a model later. A stage of fairly large size. We found this one in the Olympic Park from '72. No, I think it's beautiful. Stage, not yet built. The green on the whole of EPFL campus, there was not a single lawn. Now there is. It's planted and it's being used. Just around, slightly higher, 33 centimeters higher than the square, with one tree, just one lawn. And finally, a well-situated place to do some barbecue at the south end of the square. This was the project we presented. We then had to work directly on construction. They were extremely immediate. So this was in a weekly basis. We had to crank out every single centimeter of detail of that large, all with a very young architect who just brilliantly managed documents and the people and the contractor, including. That's not so easy. And basically, after a few months, already quite a bit of the important part of the structure, the concrete structure, has been built, which I can show you here. So there's the super surface. Benches are all sanded concrete. Extremely nice to touch. They're now already gaining spots of grease of the food that their people are eating there. And even though it's still under construction, it's totally inhabited. So the square is turned around. Where it was never occupied, now it's, as soon as the sun comes out, it's not raining. It's occupied all the time also by visitors. Every time you go there at lunchtime, it's being occupied. Here, a more global image. Here you see the setup building. The disc, which will be those bleachers, will go on the small hill on the left. You see here on the left. You see how the green is occupied the lawn. over lunchtime. And this is a model, I'm really looking forward to this one. This is a steel structure, a series of columns that forest I just showed you that will continue behind. So it will be these bleachers inside this canopy of trees, and with an extremely light structure though. So the columns have diverse diameters according to the resonance that have been done by the engineers. And the structure itself, the steps, it's 6 centimeters of steel. So it's almost inexistent, all white. So I think it will be to see this. I will just conclude with the last project very quickly, so I think I will even finish nearly within 1 hour. Is that true? Yeah. No. 1.5. It was more, okay. Do I still have time, or should I skip this one? I'll do it very fast. Okay. It is about embodied space. So as I just said, in the square project linking territory and the body scale, I think this is what architecture is about. And I showed this one. It's a super small project. It's an immersive space which has collaboration with several disciplines, from acoustics to interaction design. And it just links the Montreux Jazz Heritage, which is 50 years of concerts, festivals, which are documents which today are under UNESCO World Heritage protection and have this kind of label. These archives have been stored in a chalet in tape format, single copy, over 50 years until a very few years ago. Now again, Patrick Abischer, the president of EPFL, former president, talked to Claude Nobs, the initiator, and thought maybe it would be a good idea archives, which EPFL now, and with this project came along the idea that there should not only be this kind of endless digital archives of 50 years of jazz concerts, of course always in the technology format of the time, but spatial would actually create an immersive for the user or the visitor of those archives. So this project is about that. I will only show very few images, but I show it because I really believe it's about, again, here it's collaboration between disciplines. I think we as architects have the responsibility to understand how we translate we are immersed into, so actually our embodied experience in space, into an understanding which is a global spatial understanding, which connects systems, which connects the territory with architecture, which connects cities in themselves. And I think it has a lot to do exactly with the tools that we have at disposition. I show here, I think one of the very basic important moments is that we have to understand that when we look at the plan, it's not the same thing as if we look at perspective, is not the same thing as if we look at the 3D, is not the same thing as we look at the parametric model of a structure. And that the immersion or the translation of whatever I'm designing into an experience or the imagination, what this actually will be, is the fundamental step we have to make as architects. So therefore this Vignola drawing, which embodies as a drawing 3 viewpoints, so those 2 that you see, and at the same time the one here is also the vantage point of the structure that you're looking at. Heritage Lab, we very much played on the idea of embodied illusion. So it's not about creating, again, a kind of visual VR environment where you might think you would be at the concert, because this is totally impossible logically with 50 years of archive and on top, not interesting at all. But it would rather be exactly about the experience of the archives themselves at the moment when you are there with other people. As perspective is working here, you certainly know this is Masaccio in Milan, with this trompe-l'oeil, fantastic trompe-l'oeil church south of the square of the Duomo, which is so fascinating. It's exactly that is an illusion. When you come in, it's perfect, but as you move around, it starts to fascinate you because it's exactly an illusion. So this movement through space is actually the experience. And I think there's another very nice example of such an experience is, again, a non-single vantage point project by Bernini, where the build-up of the circles of those colonnades are two centers and not just one. So you can never occupy the actual center of this square. So again, embodied experience of a large space becomes fundamental. This we used very much in our first version. There is further just one analyzed a lot through many ways of projection, what it means to project, of course, a very basic low-res pixelated film from 1969 onto a flat screen, as opposed to what would happen if we project that same image onto a double curved screen. And that finally was what we did and what we tested here in Montreux with musicians who were playing there. And the effect is in fact quite amazing. We then produced this project with a CNC machine. Here you're looking at 1,600 pieces, the size of a baseball field, which then were literally again constructed and built together by students. This is the project. With an immersive space, which also shows outside. And a nice sound system as well, which of course is as important as any visual part in this particular project. And again, just what I just said before, I think it's really about those scales. So back to the thresholds, I think that is the key threshold. And I just can't help it. I want to do a quick advertising for the events in Zurich. If you happen to be there, come and visit House 2. It will be at Tony Areal end of May and beginning of June. And it's a collaboration, again, between many people. And I hope it will be there. I'm still quite nervous. That's it. And
many thanks, Dieter, for your generous lecture and for sharing your research and your deeper thoughts behind it with us. I think it has been very useful and a nice moment of reflection for all of us. Unfortunately, it's a bit late, so we won't have time for the round of questions. To have some more time to have some beers, maybe if you have something to ask to our guest, you can. Yeah, we don't have the question. Time for question, but you're for me. Sorry. You want to close? Please, Eduardo.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Dieter, for explaining projects in such depth. as I told you before, I gave a lecture last week in the Philippines, and I think I showed 20 projects. I showed house one I think in 6 slides in 5 or 10 minutes, and I think it was super enjoyable and probably really constructive and incredibly interesting for us to see how much behind an architectural project, the amount of work, and all that it contains. And I'm saying that because also to introduce for you, all of you in the crowd, book that you've brought here, no, which contains all of the documents that you've seen on the screen of House One, which I think is to look at it a little bit before your lecture, and it's an incredible document. So as you mentioned, you have a few copies here. I think you're selling them for 25 euros. So anybody that is interested in grasping a bit more of the content that you've seen in the lecture, don't hesitate in between your beers to come up here, and we can take care of that.
Yeah, I'm in book launch mode, so because there will be a book launch in Paris and then one in Brussels, and there was just one in Lausanne. So I brought the books. So if someone is interested, they're in euros. So if someone is interested, then back. So
let's not go back with a very heavy luggage.
Look at them, and I think we should have beers. And
I want to say one more thing, and then we can have beers. Just to thank you from myself as well. I think it has been great to see that you decided to, step away and from your personal architectural project and share with us your experience, your challenges, and the potentials that you are experiencing during the educational and academic process. I just want to say that it's going to be great to merge our expertises. Like the fact that you can do a project with 200 people is something that would be great. We have a very nice forest campus, and I know that you have been there, like experimenting in mind and body. So I invite you to collaborate with us and see what we can do together, mixing craft, but also digital technologies of fabrication, as well as this kind of collective spirit that I think it's common among us. Thank you, Dieter.